Armor for Women. I'm Fitz on the forums and Fitz on Facebook. I'm the Russelor Solis for Crate Clan in Utah, and we've got a lot of material to cover today, so let's get right to it. The first step in creating your chest plates will be to create your vest and have it finished before you start your templates. The cut and tailoring of your vest will greatly determine how your plates sit when mounted. Often when creating female chest plates, we make too much curvature on the cleavage area. If your vest is not tailored in that fashion, then your plates, when mounted, will sit off at an odd angle, and then you're probably going to be dissatisfied and have to make new plates. Hence our mantra of make the vest fit the person and the armor fit the vest. The next universal step is to make your collar plate. That will be determined based upon your shoulder seams and the neck seams on your vest. Now, to save time, we're only going to show this process sped up once, just for the sake of time. Our first example today will be a Legacy era single chest piece made from sintra without darting. Now, in this example, I'm using a piece of paper, the straight edge in the middle to mirror image it. We'll just trace one side, figure out the shape and design of the plate. In paper first, we'll lay that down, cut it out, and then we'll be transferring it to cardboard to do a cardboard copy first, so that you don't end up wasting any sintra. We're going to follow the outside armpit line of the vest so that we can see how much coverage we're going to need out to the side. I'll use this mirroring principle in pattern making quite a bit. It helps cut down on waste and allows us to keep everything symmetrical. Now, the larger the chest of the woman, the more you'll want to wrap the armor around the side of the chest to give adequate coverage. So I'm going to use the armpit seam of the vest and the top edge of the collar plate as reference. Next, we're going to transfer our paper pattern to cardboard, utilizing the horizontal lines in the cardboard so that we can roll it and bend it a bit better. Cardboard will mimic the shaping that you can do, or the amount of shaping that you can generally do with 6mm sintra. Next, we're going to be testing the fit, looking at it sideways, see how much room and space we have to be able to curve around to the side of the chest, as well as the bottom. I make a couple of relief cuts here, which we will then dart for the cardboard, because the cardboard can't actually stretch like sintra can when using a buck that we will be using later. So now here, remember that we're doing a mirror image technique, so I want to make sure that that pleat is sitting in the same spot. So I transfer that pleat over onto the original paper pattern, flip that over, and transfer it onto the other side, where I will then cut it out. And then we'll see me tape it up here so that we get about the amount of curvature that we're going to want. Once we have it all designed and finished, we're going to transfer our changes that we made to the cardboard back to the paper, and then from the paper onto the sintra, cut the sintra out and give it beveled and ready to go. We want to keep the center line marked on the sintra for references, as well as the dart marks lines that we had indicated. Which we're not going to actually put darts into this piece. We'll be stretching it. Once the sintra is up to temperature and hot enough, we'll be stretching it around this little buck that I have, and those marks will help indicate where to start that stretching. That buck is a bocce ball. Keep your eyes open for other similar shapes that you can use for this purpose. Now, we've got the two side wings shaped and heated. We're going to move them into the position. Since I don't have somebody else handing around, she's going to be spraying them just to cool them down a little bit so it retains its shape. Then I'll pull it off and start looking at the angles and the shape that we have, making sure that both sides are symmetrical. One side looks like it has a little steeper angle, so I'm going to adjust that there. Once we've got that figured out, we're going to start dishing out and forming each side of the chest, utilizing the bocce ball buck. In order to do that, you want to get that nice and warm with the heat gun. Keep your heat gun moving. Don't let it sit in one spot. Once you start burning the sintra, the structural integrity of the surface goes away, and that's when you really can't start shaping it anymore. So long as you manage to keep it warm without burning it, you can continue to reheat it and reheat it and reheat it as you need and get more stretch out of it. Now we're going to really start moving up here and show how to utilize the buck to be able to pull and draw that shape out. It's very similar to metalworking, using a dishing stump, planishing, hammers, English wheels, any stakes and that kind of stuff to try to draw that shape out. Now you'll want to keep heating the sintra and keep the temperature up so that you can continuously keep moving it and drawing that shape out. Here we're talking about how the lower section is currently sticking away from the chest and the abs. So we're going to want to work both the bottom edge and the top edge to get the overall curvature of the plate. And while sintra will stretch more than most people give it credit for, it does have its limitations. So we want to try to stretch it in both directions, from that bottom lower edge as well as the top. And now at this point, we start testing it against her body again and decide that we need to start building in that the lower edge, the cleavage section in between the two breasts, bringing that down to her ab plate. Now we'll heat that center section up quite a bit and then turn it over face down onto the butt. You'll get a really good example here of how much you can stretch. I'm just trying to bring that lower edge down to where the ab plate's going to connect underneath it because it's going to be overlapping it. So I'm not following it all the way up. You definitely could if you wanted more cleavage in your plate. Now we're going to utilize the buck here to make sure that we're maintaining our curvature at the bottom edge there, and we're also making sure that it doesn't get any pleating with the extreme curve that we now have there. Now, if you're new to using a heat gun, you don't want to be using this on top of your kitchen counter or your hardwood floor, or hardwood countertop, or anything like that. It's going to damage those surfaces. Make sure you've got a piece of metal, even a cookie sheet, or if you've got a marble slab or a marble countertop that you can use that. That's great. Now here we're using that rolling technique, the table rolling technique, where you heat it up and then you push the outside surface down and roll the opposite direction. We'll use that at the top edge as well as around the armpit area to help bring those sections that are kind of pushing out right now back into the body so that the plates don't float. Now we'll keep referencing back using the buck to make sure that those curves are staying consistent as we continue to round the overall chest plate. Again, checking against our actual body here, making sure that each side is lining up correctly with the way that the vest is set. As we do this, we're getting to the point where we're going to start wanting to make sure that those armpit areas are sitting flush, because as you bring those in, they will start changing the overall shape. Again, we'll use the table here, set all four corners down and make sure that it's sitting flush and not twisted. That helps know if the plates started to twist on us or not. And heat the top up, and we'll be using a lot more of those rolling techniques against the table like we have here. Now this technique takes a lot of patience and a lot of trial and error. Don't get discouraged if you mess up the first couple of them as you do them. Play with it and find different bucks, different sizes and shapes of stuff and objects to see what you can do. Now here again, we're going to be heating up just about a 1.5 inch strip around the armpit, and then stretch it down on the buck a little bit, and then use that table technique to press that side down into what's going to be the side of her chest so that it doesn't float away. And then we'll reference it back against her body to make sure that we're getting it in the right position. Now, heat forming sintra in this fashion is definitely one of the longer single step processes that we're going to cover today. You'll sit here for quite a while. This is probably one of the longer segments that we filmed, and we spent over 2 hours working on this one. So I'm just speeding up going through the process here. One of the things that this really points out is how many times that you can reheat sintra and how many times you can rework it. Now granted, I'm not going all the way down to cold. I'm only using the water every now and then to shock it. I'm letting it get down to the point where it retains its shape without stretching too much. I want to be able to bring it back up to full heat at the same time. Me sitting here and just doing this from start to finish. So it's gonna be able to reheat quite a bit, reshape and fine tune. And even after this, we may come back and play with it some more on another day when she's got more time, when I've got more time. We just want to try to get as much of this done so that you can kind of understand just really how far you can stretch and pull and manipulate this material when you're using the proper amount of heat and keeping it from burning. Now I'm making sure that the curvature of the collar plate, since that's just a straight plate right now, is actually going to line up really well and doesn't end up pushing the chest plate that we've created off of her vest too much. So here I'm writing some reference lines for the overlap, so then I can then just heat that top edge. We're going to roll the edge down a little bit, and then utilizing the buck again to get the curvature that we want, and then test it against our recruit. Now at this point, we're going to switch over to another recruit doing a similar legacy chest plate, but this time with darts. Now she left her visual design at home, so she made this quick little design on our whiteboard. We've already made the collar plate, and it's a little low so that we can underlap the chest plate. We're putting the chest pattern back on now, again referencing with the middle line there, and then indicating where the top of the plate is so that we can put it on and off later. We'll draw the lower curve of the plate that's on the bottom of the bust, and then fold the pleats in our paper, and use the top flat edge of the fold on that pleat to draw the top edge of the pleat that we're going to cut in there. Now everybody's pleats are going to be different. There I was writing mirror line on that flat section, and that's an important thing to do because sometimes you can get little pieces like this flipped around and you put them on the wrong side. Here we're going to go through and make references again on the color plate so that we know where this piece needs to be. We transfer it again over to cardboard. Again, save yourself from wasting a bunch of sintra. Cardboard's cheap. There we're following around the side of the chest to make sure that we have enough coverage and that it follows kind of the line of the vest around the shoulder and towards the armpit. Heating both sides up, and we start getting the bend in there. Hit it with some water, reheat some more, hit the other side. Had a couple extra hands running around. There again, we're not going to bring this plate all the way down onto the rib cage. Her first ab plate's going to do that, so it'll come in. Here with those pleats, it just definitely makes it a little bit easier when it comes to getting that lower roll underneath the breasts. But now we're locking both sides in and trying to heat up those sections. I normally do go through and bevel edges on plates like I did on these ones on a router table ahead of time. You don't have to do it that way. You can do it after it's shaped. I just find getting the majority of it off for beveling purposes is nice. Don't bevel the inside of your pleats though, because you need them to match up as best as possible. So here I'm again using the buck to put a concave curvature to the lower edge there in between the breasts and down towards the ab plate. Again, you can heat that sucker up and it'll stretch quite a bit. So bringing that line up, I know she wants a little bit more curvature than the previous gal did with her plates. So we're going to be working those out. Eventually here we're going to get to the point where I've got those seams kind of right where we want them. We'll be working this back and forth quite a bit. But eventually we'll tape the inside edge when we're done. And then in this case, I had a tube of JB Water Weld, which is a 2-part mixing putty that comes in a tube and gray center in the middle and a white center on the outside. And you just mix it up until it's consistent, and we'll be spreading those into the seams of the pleats. You can use other products like Epoxy Sculpt or Bondo even, which we utilize later in one of the other methods. And we'll just continue working the plate, going over the buck, then also rolling from the inside against the table. Try to bring that curvature out, and we're stretching it pretty much to the max as we go. And we'll work one little area and work the next. You see I've got the duct tape on the back side to kind of help keep the pleats together. Trying not to heat that pleat line too much, but work around the circumference of the spherical section that we're building around the breast, so that those cavities, will start growing from the inside out. Then also using the buck from the opposite side as we build up and around the cleavage area to be able to push it back in, work as many different angles as we can to get as much stretch out of the plate as possible. Now, she'll probably end up coming back again when we've got more time. We're running out of time today, but we wanted to bust through this and show you as much of it as possible, see just how much you can really stretch this material. And like I said before, we're going to use JB Water Weld on the pleat seams here. You mix that putty up really good, and then you're going to stretch it in there. Use a little bit of water to help smooth it out if it's getting a little dry. This was an older tube of stuff that I had. We'll get it in there, we'll let it dry, and then we'll get to sanding on it. Now, you don't have to use power tools like I am. You can totally do it by hand, but power tools do make it easier. Next, we're going to give a brief overview of Pepakura or papercraft. So there's so much information on this subject out on the internet, I'm not going to cover it in detail. Essentially, you have a 3-dimensional low polygon model that can be printed out on paper in small sections that have tabs, and you fold them all together and glue them to that 3-dimensional shape. And then you're going to coat it in fiberglass, Bondo, and other types of resin that we're going to actually talk about in the next section. So there are Pepakura files available on the forums. There's also more on the internet and different specialty sites. The trick there is that you're going to have them scaled to fit you personally, which may necessitate you learning a piece of software or finding someone that already knows it and can make the adjustments for you. In Pepakura Designer, Viewer, or Armor Smith is the other. We're going to move on to modern era, more Boba Fett style, but for the bustier gal. So now we've made the vest, we've made the collar, and we are roughing out the pattern for the chest. Now, the bustier you get, the harder it is to find a pre-made template or pattern that is going to actually fit you. So this is why we're going to show this. So this is just one example of how to make custom plates of that style. So here again, we are using the mirror technique here, but I'm also making sure that I have added in a 12 millimeter gap at the top and center line, and then around the iron heart. And then we're going to take the pattern and trim off the edges and the gaps. Then we double check and make sure that it's going to fit, and we've got the pleat in the right spot and that the mandibles are lined up correctly. And as it turns out, I didn't have enough pattern paper down on that lower section for the mandibles, so we go ahead and we tape some more on there, and then we test it out again before transferring it all over to poster board. And then when that works out, I go ahead and also transfer to cardboard, so we have both mediums to work with here. I wanted to show an example of how both can work with the same process. Now, you'll notice I've used that painter's tape on the inside for both the pleats as well as on the poster board for that inside edge to maintain the curvature. Here we're doing straight fiberglass resin. Get it at pretty much any auto body store, Walmart, Home Depot. I normally do about a tablespoon of resin at a time and put a squirt of hardener inside it. Now make sure you put a protective sheet down and then use a chip brush to mix it up and spread it over the product. Now, the more resin hardener you use, the faster it hardens. If you don't put enough, it might never harden. So I've got lots of people that have come back and said, oh man, my item here is still sticky 7 days later. Well, at that point, you just put another coat on and do double or triple the amount of hardener that you did the first time. Now this is fiberglass cloth. You can get it anywhere that you can get any Bondo product. We've let the plates sit for about 20-30 minutes. They dried. We did 2 coats on the outside and then came back in. I first laid down a whole coat of the resin just by itself, and then we're laying this in there and tapping it down into the liquid resin. Again, we have to work really fast when this is going because I put a lot of hardener in there. I don't want to spend all day waiting for it to dry. So make sure you're prepared. You have your pieces cut as best as possible. Here I'm just trimming off the excess so I don't have to cut through the fiberglass cloth as well as resin later. And then once I've got all those pieces in, I'm going to dump more resin in there and just kind of staple it in. That cloth's moving around right now while it's still wet, and the resin that's holding onto it is still wet. So you got to just be careful and be gentle as you go through and put it in there. We're going to put it pretty much a double coat to the inside with this because you had the coat first, then the fiberglass cloth sticking to it, and then put a whole other coat on top of that. After it's dried, we'll come back in again. The more resin you put between yourself and the cloth, the better, because you don't want any of those fiberglass strands coming through your vest and stabbing you. Next, we're going to mix up some Bondo body filler. It comes with a red cream hardener. The more hardener you put in there, the redder your overall mix will be. You want to mix that up until it's a consistent color. The redder it is, the faster it is going to harden up. And I mean, it'll go from, hey, you're working on it, to it's gel the next second you look at it. So once it's gone to gel, I pretty much toss whatever I had left and move on. I'm filling in the pleats where they were pulling out, utilizing that first. Now we're going to move on to Rondo. Rondo is body filler plus resin, and then additionally both hardeners. The more resin you put into the mixture, the runnier or the thinner it's going to be. Now that's a benefit because if you've ever worked with just straight Bondo, it becomes clay-like as you spread it. It gets to be very tough to move. The more resin you put in here, the thinner it's going to be. You're going to get it to about a consistency of a good pancake batter so that it will self-level quite a bit and you won't have quite as much sanding. And so long as you don't work it too much and you get the material on as fast as possible. Now I'm used to doing smaller batches of resin stuff, so here I'm using one of the same smaller water bottle bases for the first couple of sets, and then I say, oh, to heck with it, I'm just going to go use the top of the Bondo body filler can, which is what it's actually designed for. Again, I'm using a chip brush. We get that on. It's going on super smooth and super nice compared to the straight Bondo. So before you put any hardener into your mix, just make sure you've added enough resin to the Bondo and continue to mix it until you actually put the hardener in it. It won't harden. This is a Bondo spatula that helps spread it out and get it nice and smooth. Think if you're familiar with icing cakes and whatnot, it's very, very similar at that point. And we're going to spread it now to the inside. Of course, every time I'm moving it over, we've actually let it sit there for 20-30 minutes for it to dry in between spaces. After that, once they've dried and we've got about 3 or 4 coats on there, I'm going to take it over and I'm going to start sanding it. You can do this all by hand with the sanding. The better care you take in laying it up, the less sanding you'll have to do. So regardless if you're using a power tool or not, try to get your Rondo as nice and smooth as possible, and it'll make your life easier. Now at this point, I noticed that I've sanded down into the cardboard on those edges as I tried to make the edges a little smoother. So we'll just add more Bondo back to those edges. We'll do more shaping, more sanding, and sculpting basically from this point forward, as well as cutting out the Ironheart notch on the front panel. We'll now move forward to a Galaxy-inspired chess piece using Sintra with a single plate. So I apologize for starting a little bit late on this one. As far as the picture goes, I had hit the wrong record button. She's already got her vest done. She's got it on. We've done the collar plates and taped them into position and did the first draft on the paper. Here we are adjusting the sides, getting the plate. Now, Galaxy plates are a lot stiffer. They're not a lot flatter in design generally. So we're going to try to keep the top as flat as possible, but give it a nice gentle curve over the bust and down the side. So the pleat that we have here, I'll use the fold in the paper and mark the spot where it needs to be cut out. Then we'll see me take it down. We'll cut it. We'll trim it. We'll get it transferred here over to the cardboard so that we can fold it and adjust it and get it taped up so that we can have that mock-up and know that we're sitting right before moving on to Sintra. And now that we're satisfied with that cardboard pattern, we've cut out the Sintra, looking at it, and figuring out how much of a curvature we're going to need. This time, instead of utilizing the little bocce buck, we're going to use this big 6-inch PVC T-fitting. Now we use that so that we can get a nice consistent bend all the way across the entire width of the plate. Now you don't have to go out and buy one of those. You can look around for other shapes and objects in your home, like a trash can or a propane tank. There's lots of different things. Just kind of keep in mind the shape that you're looking for and look for it. Once you've got the shape to where you want, hit it with water, shock it. We're testing it here to make sure we've got the right curvature before turning the sides in and meeting up that pleat. Now, once we've utilized the table method again here to get that nice square edge to wrap around to the side, we'll end up using Bondo body filler to finish up filling in the seams, and then we'll sand that down smooth. And then move on to our ab plate so we know the curvature down around below the breasts. And so we know if we need to come back in and tweak the lower fangs in, or maybe at the center, give it a little bit more curvature so that those fangs come in a little bit more on the side. And now we're going to move on to another method using a mannequin. Now in this example, we are using the size large mannequin. We found that the contours on the chest is much better. You don't have to use all of the torso. You can cut them down and cut down the spacing in between. The smaller sizes were just a little too inconvenient and didn't really work for even smaller girl. And in this example, I'm using a bandsaw, of course. If you don't have access to a bandsaw, you can use a rotary cutter off of a Dremel tool, a hacksaw, or even a jigsaw. The important thing is that you're going to take the arms, the legs, and the neck off. That way you can hold it up against the lady that's going to be drawing, and you can make sure everything's proportional. Now we've already drawn half of the plate design for her on the mannequin, utilizing a center line that we've drawn first and a horizontal line across just above the belly button. Now you don't have to go all the way out to the side, and make sure you bring in enough around the armpits for comfort. Now a note here, the ab and collar areas do not always work because that plastic does not like to be reshaped. So if you need to, just go ahead and use Sintra to make new plates. Our next step is to go ahead and translate the pattern from one side to the other, utilizing a spotlight in the back to shine light through the white. We're going to lay a piece of paper down against the center line and trace it out. Flip it over after you've got them traced to both sides and color that in with a black magic marker. Now when you go through to cut this out, you can use again your cutoff wheels, jigsaws. If you're very careful, use a bandsaw, but make sure you've cut it from the inside so that the chest is face down against your cutting table, or else that plastic has a tendency of grabbing on the teeth of the bandsaw blade and just being pulled down and snapping the whole mannequin in half. We'll look at some examples here of some plates that have been finished and put on completed kits. The first of which is the solid chest plate that we've been looking at. She went forward and added trauma plating with 3mm Sintra to the top of the plates, and then of course the final kit. Our next examples utilize 2 mannequins per chest plate, where they use the second chest to be a matching set of trauma plates that they've cut out and then added over the top of the original. This is definitely one of those quote-unquote pro tips, being that the whole point of using a mannequin is so that you don't have to form all those complex curves around the breast on your own. And now that you've got a hard shell, I mean, you could do it a little bit out of 3mm sintra or whatnot, but it's just a lot easier because those contours and curves are already there and vacuum formed for you. As a note of caution, this plastic does not accept glue or paint very well, so if you are going to use a mannequin, make sure you use something like Bulldog Adhesion Promoter, available at Home Depot, Lowe's, and other places to help you be able to get your paint and glue to grab to this plastic. And now on to my favorite and final segment, 3D printed chest plates. There was a little concern that this was technology that wouldn't be accessible to everyone. I hope to dissuade everyone of that opinion and explain just how easy and accessible it is to everyone. The real barrier here between any of these options is the knowledge on how to utilize them. Now, 3D printing is one of the fastest growing technologies in the world. Its exponential growth in the last 8 years since patents rolled off has been nothing but remarkable. It would be hard to imagine a clan in the club that doesn't have access to a 3D printer or knows somebody that does. They are literally everywhere and become more and more affordable every single day. So printers aren't the actual bar in this technology. What it is the knowledge and understanding how to make the 3D model fit the individual properly. Now, we don't have time to go through all the different 3D modeling software programs and whatnot that are out there, but there are a lot of free programs that are very powerful that will handle this process without a problem. You just need to invest the time to learn a new skill or find somebody else that is willing to. So the big question is, how do you get your dimensions and body shape into the computer so that you can model your plates? So let me show you a couple of ways of doing that. Photo referencing is the process by which you take a picture of the individual's front, side, and back. You take those images and you import them into the 3D modeling software on individual planes that you orient at a perpendicular orientation to each other so that you can use them as a reference for modeling, which we will get into after the next step. Now, just like 3D printing has come down, 3D scanning's come down in price in the last few years as well. There are programs out there that work just great for our purposes that are free, and or you can buy the more advanced versions of them. Now, I'm using Connect, which is the program I just showed the splash screen for, in conjunction with an Xbox 360 Kinect sensor. And we all know that these things are pretty much obsolete now with the newer game systems. So you can get them really cheap if you don't already have like one or two sitting around in your junk drawer someplace. Now, you will need to pick up the USB adapter cable for the Kinect, but you can get it online for about $12. You can use the unit by hand and just scan the front of the person or even walk around of them if you have a big enough space. I've been using it so much that I've invested in building my own little turntable here and a tower on the backside that the Xbox controller goes up and down on, so I can get a really nice full body scan of people. Now, here's some screen grabs. It will show some of the models. It will also UV map your model and scan your person down to the millimeter for modeling on top of. And now I've imported one of our scans of a recruit into Blender, which is a free software that's really powerful. And now I'm going to start with building the collar plate again first. And I'm doing it on one side, starting with the polygon, and I have gone into edit mode and extruded the edges and vertices of the right side of that polygon out until I have the shape of the collar plate. And then we're going to add 3 modifiers, the first of which is the mirror modifier, and that obviously flips it over. We only have to work on one side of the model then, and it automatically mirrors everything over. Next is the subdivision surface modifier, which makes each polygon into multiple polygons, smoothing the surface out. And the last one is the solidifying modifier, which basically adds a thickness that you can apply a specific number to. So where I like to print things out at about 6 millimeters thick. So once I've got those 3 modifiers figured out, I can start playing with the mesh a little bit more. I'm not going to do too much more on this collar plate, but what I will do is grab the individual vertices on the very bottom line. I'm going to copy them and then separate them into a separate object. And what that does is it copies all of those modifiers at the same time over into a new object. So I can start playing with that, and I'm going to bring the original line straight down, extruding it out, and then taking the other lines out. I'm doing this all with the vertices and pushing the points, and you see how it mirror images everything. And right now I'm kind of hugging the mesh of the 3D scan so that I can keep it as close to that vest material as possible. And then once I start meshing with it and pulling it out a little bit, I'll move the whole object just slightly forward off of the 3D scan piece, and then start playing with all the different shaping and whatnot. And you can put as much curvature as you want, or as little curvature as you want, to emphasize or de-emphasize your bust size. Now here I've gone into wireframe mode so that I can see how the plate is actually interacting with the vest geometry to make sure that it's all going to set up correctly. Once we're happy with the shape and size, we will export it out. We'll collapse all the stacks of the modifiers, and then it becomes a solid object. We then split it across the hemisphere horizontally. That way we can take the two pieces and orient them both along that split in our slicing software to make sure that we use little to no support structure needed in order to print this, and that saves time and filament when you go to 3D print. Now once you've got them done, you just weld the parts together and then finish it like you would any other 3D print. You can do them as a single plate, double plate, you can do galaxy plates, whatever you want. It's just a matter of learning the software enough to get the model shape that you would like. And that's all the time we have today, folks. This has been Mandalorian Chest Armor for Women. Again, I am Fitz on the forums and Fitz Calston on Facebook. I hope you all learned something today, and I'd like to thank my Crate Clan sisters for the use of their images and projects we've done over the years.